The signs had been prepped and carefully placed near the front entrance after I'd spent the better part of the last couple of days perfecting them. Now came the hard part. Climbing the stairs to the master bedroom, I quickly stripped the bed, dragged the mattress off the queen-sized frame, and, with a combination of lifting and sliding, maneuvered it downstairs, through the hallway, out the front door, and onto the lawn by the street. Back inside, I threw the bed slats and sheets down the stairs, carried them outside, and added them to the growing pile beside the mattress. I headed back upstairs once more, dismantled the side rails, and swiftly took them out as well. A glance at my watch told me it was 4:22 p.m. Time was ticking. I had to finish everything by 5. Reassembling the bed outside took until 4:35. Next, I tackled the kitchen table. It was light enough for me to manage alone, so I angled it through the door and placed it beside the bed on the lawn. The last thing left was the 6x8 throw rug from the living room. I rolled it up and carried it out to join the other items, then set up the signs and stood back to check the time. 4:55. Only 10 minutes until my wife would be home. Standing in the middle of the street, I looked over my handiwork. It was a sight that almost brought a tear to my eye. Our marriage bed, the kitchen table, and the throw rug, all 3 places where my wife and her lover had repeatedly carried out their affair over the past 6 months. The signs I had placed around the furniture added the final touch. I walked up to each item and read aloud the large sign in front of it. These items are free for the taking. They are no longer wanted in this house. If you can tolerate the stink of infidelity and broken promises, help yourself. The sign above the bed described my wife's affair in detail, listing her regular meetups with her lover over the last 6 months. The sign above the kitchen table mentioned how they often used it just before she served me dinner. The one by the throw rug noted their preference for that particular spot. Each sign featured a large 17 by 24-inch photo of the 2 of them caught in the act. Behind the table, a 5th sign exposed the identity of her lover, Tom Harris, her boss at Mitchell Price and Harris Realty. He was a married man with 3 children, completely unaware of what was about to hit him. But not for long. By 4:57, I noticed the crowd beginning to gather. Neighbors came out to see what was happening, cars slowed to a stop, and some people started calling their friends or the police. I nodded at the growing crowd and calmly stepped back inside, shutting the door behind me. Right at 5 o'clock, my wife's car turned the corner. She slowed down as she took in the scene on our front lawn. I could imagine her confusion as her eyes landed on the furniture, the signs, and especially the giant photos of her and Tom, captured in the middle of their illicit acts, their faces full of lust. Even through the closed car window and above the murmurs of the 40 or 50 onlookers, I heard her scream, "No! Oh God, no!" Her eyes darted from the signs to the front window, where she spotted me standing. Our eyes met. Her face was ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked as if she was silently asking me the same questions I had asked myself when I first found out. I stood there for a moment, watching her break down, then turned away and drew the curtains closed. Maybe this is the right time to explain how Lisa and I ended up in this nightmare. My name is Ethan Brooks. I met Lisa during our junior year of college when a mutual friend introduced us. From the moment I saw her, I was hooked. She wasn't what you'd call traditionally beautiful, but she had this magnetic charm that I couldn't resist. Lisa was 5 feet 2 inches, with bright blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair. Her petite, perfectly proportioned frame captivated me, and I knew I had to win her over. We started dating, and before long we were inseparable. Within a month, we became intimate for the first time, and it was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I was crazy about her, completely consumed by my love for her. It didn't matter that we weren't each other's first. The passion between us was intense and undeniable. Every moment together felt electric. Our love continued to grow over time. After graduation, we got married and moved into our first place together, a small condo in Van Nuys. Lisa started working in real estate, and I found a job in electronics manufacturing. Life seemed perfect. We eventually moved into a bigger house, and as our financial situation improved, we started a family. We had 2 kids, Shelby, who's now 8, and Ryan, who's 6. Our kids meant the world to us, and I thought we had built an ideal life together. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. I wish I knew what. I wish I had seen the warning signs. But I didn't. I was completely blind to it, living in a world of trust. It wasn't until an unexpected event involving our daughter, Shelby, that the truth came to light. It was a Thursday, just before noon, when the school nurse called to let me know Shelby wasn't feeling well. I was in the middle of a staff meeting, so I asked the nurse to contact Lisa first. But after trying both her office and cell phone, the nurse couldn't reach her, so she called me again. Realizing I had to go get Shelby, I left work and drove to her school. But when I got home and opened the garage door, I was hit by a sight that stopped me cold. Parked in my spot right next to Lisa's car was a vehicle I didn't recognize. A wave of dread washed over me. No, this couldn't be happening. Lisa, the woman I loved more than anything, couldn't possibly be having an affair. But there it was, a strange car in the garage, and the door was closed. Something was wrong, and I needed answers. I couldn't let Shelby see this. I told Shelby to stay in the car for a minute, coming up with a quick excuse about the exterminator spraying for bugs and how the fumes might make her feel worse. It was the first time I'd ever lied to her. Naturally, she complained about feeling tired and wanting to go inside, but I assured her I'd check things out first and come get her soon. Later, when she asked me again what was happening, I told her everything was fine, blaming my discomfort on some strange smell in the house. After dropping Shelby off at her grandmother's, I promised I'd be back to pick her up in a couple of hours. I didn't tell my mom what I had seen. I just asked her to watch Shelby while I finished up at work. As much as I wanted to rush back home and catch them red-handed, I realized I needed more than just a confrontation. I wanted revenge. Real revenge. On the drive back to my office, my mind started working overtime, plotting how I could completely ruin my wife and her boss for good. At the electronics company where I worked, there were several divisions. I was a senior engineer in the medical equipment department, but we shared the complex with a division that handled commercial security gear. When I got back to the office, I told my secretary to make sure I wasn't disturbed for the rest of the afternoon. Then I called Mike Davis, my counterpart in the security division. Mike was not only an excellent engineer but also a good friend. He agreed to meet me right away, mentioning that he was already coming my way to drop off some blueprints. I let my secretary know that Mike could come straight into my office when he arrived. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Mike knocked on my door. I told him to come in and shut the door behind him. The moment he saw me, he commented that I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I didn't waste time. I explained that I had just discovered my wife and her boss were having an affair, right in our bedroom. He was shocked, but I assured him it was true. I went on to tell him how I had come home unexpectedly to pick up Shelby from school, only to find the two of them together. I hadn't confronted them yet. Instead, I had my daughter wait in the car while I left quietly to take her to my mom's. Mike expressed his sympathy and asked what I was planning to do next. I admitted I wasn't sure, but I knew I needed solid evidence. I told him I wanted to set up video and audio recordings of their future encounters. That's where Mike came in. I needed his help getting the right equipment. Mike, always the logical one, asked if I was certain there would be another time. Maybe this was a one-off, he suggested. But I knew better. I told him about overhearing their conversations, how they had been meeting up regularly for 6 months. With no other convenient place for them to go, my house during work hours was perfect for their secret meetups. I knew it wasn't a one-time thing. We talked for a few more minutes, and Mike started outlining the details. He told me about a new line of wireless miniature cameras and microphones his division was testing, small enough to hide easily and link directly to my laptop or home computer. He even had a voice-activated recorder I could tuck under the seat of Lisa's car, which would pick up her conversations while driving. It would only capture her side of things, but it was better than nothing. I thanked him and told him I'd pick up the equipment from his office the next day. That evening, going back home was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I wasn't sure if I could face Lisa and act like nothing was wrong. I decided it was best to make her think I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't far from the truth. After picking up Shelby from my mom's, we got home to find Lisa in the kitchen, making dinner. The second she saw Shelby with me, She looked panicked. I asked her why she hadn't told me about Shelby being sick, mentioning that the school nurse had left a message on the answering machine. Lisa fumbled for an explanation, saying she must have accidentally turned her phone off while she was showing houses and had been too busy to check it. I couldn't help but feel a surge of bitterness. Busy with her boss, no doubt. Still, Lisa hugged Shelby, apologized, and helped her get ready for bed. I knew, despite everything, she loved our kids. Maybe that's why I was the one standing in the way of her happiness. Lisa went back to the kitchen to finish making soup for Shelby and dinner for us. Meanwhile, I told her I wasn't feeling well and that I'd be sleeping in the guest room that night, just in case I was coming down with something. She looked at me with concern, saying I felt clammy and looked pale. She had no idea the real reason I felt sick. I went upstairs, dreading the thought of stepping into the master bedroom, but I needed to grab my toiletries, toothbrush, and clothes for the next day. When I forced myself into the room, I noticed the window had been opened, and the smell of sex had mostly faded. The bed was made with fresh sheets, of course. Just looking at it filled me with rage, picturing her boss in our bed, whispering to her about how she belonged to him. The anger burned inside me, but I held it in. I had to keep my cool, at least for now. There was a plan to execute, and I couldn't afford to lose control. I gathered what I needed and headed to the guest room, closing the door behind me. Stripping down to my underwear, I got into bed, feeling stiff and cold. Part of me wanted to cry, but I wouldn't let myself. I had to stay focused. I had a mission, and there was no room for emotions. I lay there for hours, staring into the dark, unable to sleep. Later, after she had put the kids to bed, Lisa quietly entered the guest room. I pretended to be asleep. She gently pressed her hand to my forehead before leaving the room, closing the door behind her. Normally, Lisa handled taking the kids to school, so I made sure to get up early, shower, and leave the house before she even woke up. She probably found it strange, but I could always chalk it up to needing to make up for lost time from being sick the day before. Honestly, her opinion didn't matter much to me anymore. I just wanted out. Out of what, though? Until yesterday, I thought I was in a happy marriage, built on a foundation of trust, loyalty, and love. Turns out I couldn't have been more wrong. I arrived at work earlier than everyone else, brewed some coffee, and started mapping out my next steps. First, I knew I had to cancel our shared credit cards and transfer half of our joint accounts into a new account in my name only. I also needed to update my will, my life insurance, and the beneficiaries on my 401k, removing Lisa entirely and naming only Shelby and Ryan. As I worked through the list, it struck me how easy it was to dismantle 13 years of marriage. Felt too easy. Deep down, I knew it was going to get harder. And I knew I needed a solid divorce lawyer to protect myself from whatever Lisa might try to pull. Living in a no-fault divorce state meant that her cheating wouldn't make much of a difference financially. Still, it could give me a leg up in securing joint custody of the kids. Lisa had shown just how little I meant to her, but I couldn't deny she was a devoted mother. I wasn't trying to take the kids away from her. I just needed to make sure I stayed a major part of their lives. I tried not to think about our love life and the humiliation I felt after overhearing Lisa praise her lover for being better than me in every way. If I dwelled on it now, I'd start to doubt myself, and that wasn't something I could afford at this moment. That reckoning would come later, and I knew when it did, it would probably wreck me. With my list done, I called Mike's office. He reassured me everything would be ready by noon and offered to help with the installation. I tried to focus on the pile of paperwork at my desk, but I couldn't ignore the call from Lisa on my phone. Her usual affectionate tone only fueled my anger this time. She sounded concerned, saying she hadn't been able to check on me before I left that morning. I kept it vague, saying I needed some space to clear my head. She tried to suggest something to make me feel better later that evening, but I couldn't help feeling bitter and betrayed. Still, I kept my tone neutral, saying we'd see. She commented on how distant I seemed, and I brushed it off, telling her I was just preoccupied. We agreed to meet at home by 6, and she told me she'd be at the office all day if I needed her. I called Mike again, and he confirmed everything was ready. We arranged to meet at the loading dock entrance, where we loaded all the equipment into Mike's van. Together, we got everything installed and tested by 3:30 that afternoon. We set up the software on my home office computer and created a secure folder where the recordings from the cameras and microphones would be stored. We placed bugs in the living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and especially the master bedroom. I made sure that room had 4 cameras to catch every angle. We even set up a camera and microphone in the master bathroom, just in case they decided to take a shower together after their little rendezvous. The whole system was motion activated, so the cameras would trigger the microphones as soon as something happened. I was ready. That night was brutal. After dinner, once the kids were in bed, I followed Lisa to our room. I turned my back to her and pretended to fall asleep. She could tell something was off and asked if everything was okay. I told her I'd been feeling insecure, like maybe I wasn't enough for her. She reassured me, saying I was more than enough, that she couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to me, and that I was her perfect lover. Despite her words, I stayed distant, brushing off her concern, telling her I was just tired. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, though I could hear her softly crying later. I felt no sympathy. I couldn't tell if her tears were from guilt over what she'd done or from frustration with me. Either way, it didn't matter. I woke up before her the next morning and used the opportunity to slip the voice recorder under her car seat. Then I checked the video and audio recordings from the night before. Everything was crystal clear, even in the dim lighting of the bedroom. I had everything I needed. When Lisa woke up, she was a bit cold, mentioning how hurtful some of my words had been the night before. Then, almost like flipping a switch, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and shifted back to her usual cheerful self. Maybe it had something to do with the plans she had with her boss later that day. I poured her a cup of coffee and told her I'd be in my office all day. She mentioned she'd be showing several houses that afternoon and was confident about making a big sale, but assured me she'd still pick up Shelby and Ryan after school. As I was heading toward the garage door, she reminded me that I hadn't said, "I love you." She stressed how much it meant to her to hear those words every morning. I apologized, telling her I had a lot on my mind, but she pressed me, insisting that it was important. I promised I wouldn't forget next time. Then I left. Yeah, maybe one day I'll tell someone I love them again, but only when I find someone I can actually trust enough to love. For now, I had a feeling her afternoon of showing houses was just code for more time with her lover. I was hoping today would be the end of it. I was tired of all the games and wanted this nightmare to be over. The morning dragged on as I worked in my office, but I couldn't stop glancing at my watch. Finally, around noon, I told my secretary I'd be gone for a few hours and set my plan into motion. I borrowed a company van and parked across from the house, waiting to see what would unfold. It was almost 1 o'clock when I saw Lisa's car pull up, open the garage door, and park in her usual spot. She went inside without closing the garage door, which immediately raised my suspicions. Either she was leaving again or waiting for someone. 10 minutes later, my suspicions were confirmed. The same car I'd seen the day I first caught them pulled into the garage, parking right in my spot, just like he had taken my place in Lisa's life. The garage door shut behind him as he got out of the car. The sheer audacity of it. They actually had the nerve to meet in my house, in my bed, carrying on their affair as if they were untouchable. It was as if they believed they wouldn't get caught or didn't care even if they did. Well, they were wrong on both counts. They were caught, and soon enough I'd make sure they regretted it. With the cameras and microphones in place, I knew I'd have all the proof I needed. And with that thought, the tears finally came. 13 years of believing I had a faithful, loving wife had been shattered. Just like I had never thought about cheating on her, I always believed she'd never betray me. With the tears came the doubts. Was he really a better lover? Maybe he was better looking, but neither of us was anything extraordinary. Why risk both our marriages for this? As much as I wanted to storm into the house and confront them, I knew it wouldn't change anything. I'd already caught them once. What would confronting them now accomplish? Would I feel better by taking it out on him? Probably, but I knew it would only lead to trouble. Neither of them was worth going to jail for. My only concern was how this would affect our kids and his. By 2:30 they were done. The garage door opened, and he left 15 minutes later. Lisa followed soon after, shutting the garage behind her. I knew she'd be back with the kids by 3:30, so I parked in the garage and headed to my home office to check the footage. I didn't want to watch it all, just enough to make sure the evidence was captured and stored. It only took 10 minutes to confirm I had what I needed. It wasn't an exact repeat of what I'd seen before, but it was explicit enough. They started on the kitchen table, the same table where I ate my meals. They joked about how many times they'd wondered if I'd ever figure out what had been going on right under my nose. Then they moved to our bedroom, though not before her lover suggested trying my daughter's room for a change of scenery. My wife quickly shut that idea down, saying the kids' rooms were off-limits. At least she had some lines she wouldn't cross, just not when it came to me. In the bedroom, they continued, but what struck me was how neither of them expressed love. Yet Lisa kept praising her boss, calling him the best lover she'd ever had. I couldn't understand why they finished things off on the living room throw rug. But they did. And, of course, Lisa didn't bother changing the sheets. She probably figured she'd have time to air out the room and clean up before I got home at 6. Once I confirmed the footage was saved on my hard drive, I shut the system down and left. I couldn't stomach checking the bed to see what mess they'd left. I'd seen enough. As much as my heart had hardened toward Lisa, there was still a sick feeling deep inside me, though it was quickly being replaced by pure, burning rage. I might have even smiled, knowing what kind of hell I was about to rain down on them both. Back at work, I filled Mike in on everything. Like me, he couldn't wrap his head around how a supposedly loving wife like Lisa could do something like this. Not only had she broken our vows, but she went out of her way to humiliate me in front of her lover, constantly affirming how much better he was than me. These thoughts drove me into a dark place of pain and despair, but I knew I had to climb out of it if I was going to see my plan through to the end. I needed to destroy them both, and the first step was finding a good divorce lawyer. Mike suggested I contact the law firm our company used for corporate matters and ask for recommendations. I spoke to one of the corporate attorneys, who gave me the names of 3 lawyers known for protecting husbands' rights. The first was retiring, but the second agreed to meet me the next day at 3 p.m. With that sorted, I set aside time the following morning to handle canceling credit cards, changing beneficiaries, and transferring funds. When I returned home that evening, Lisa was in the kitchen, cooking dinner while the kids worked on their homework in their rooms. She wore a yellow sundress and looked beautiful. For a moment, my heart nearly broke all over again. She was smiling, so happy. I figured it was her usual mood after spending an afternoon with her boss. She greeted me cheerfully and asked how my day was, mentioning that hers had been great because she made a sale. I played along, responding with mild interest, fully aware of the real reason behind her happiness. I casually asked if anything else notable had happened or if she'd met anyone interesting that day. She denied it, saying she'd been focused on work and just wanted to get home to her family. As if that was supposed to reassure me, I excused myself to go upstairs and change, and while doing so, I noticed the sheets had been replaced, and the room was aired out. When I came back downstairs, I mentioned seeing water on the shower floor and asked if she'd showered that afternoon. Her startled expression was all I needed to see. She denied it, suggesting the drain might be clogged. I couldn't resist adding that maybe someone had snuck into the house for a quick shower. She tried to laugh it off, but I could see she was rattled. Dinner was quiet after that. Minimal conversation. Just me sitting there, knowing exactly where her mind had been, and with whom. I caught Lisa off guard by switching seats with her at dinner, and she immediately asked why I had changed spots. I shrugged it off, saying I just wanted a change of scenery. She looked confused and barely ate, pushing food around on her plate more than actually eating. The kids were busy chatting about their day, while Lisa and I mostly listened, throwing in a few comments here and there. After dinner, we all helped clear the dishes, and I retreated to my office to work on the next phase of my plan. I reviewed the footage from earlier that day, selecting the clearest stills to turn into photos. I saved them into a file, ready for printing. Then, I began crafting the wording for the signs I would use alongside the photographs. My plan was almost complete, just a few steps left. Visiting my lawyer to get the divorce rolling, sorting out my finances, and waiting for my wife's next rendezvous with her lover. When I finally went to bed, Lisa was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I was sure my behavior had left her with something to think about, though it didn't matter. There was nothing she could say or do to change my mind about divorcing her after what she'd done. At least I had the small satisfaction of knowing she was probably uneasy. Today was Tuesday, and she had mentioned closing another sale on Thursday. That was all I needed to know. Thursday would be the day I brought them both down. The next morning, I got up early again, showered, and left before Lisa woke up. I had a lot to take care of and wanted to make the most of my time. My lawyer appointment wasn't until 3 p.m., but that gave me plenty of time to handle the financial matters first. I started by going to HR, where I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and 401k from Lisa to Shelby and Ryan. The woman helping me gave me a few odd looks, but I didn't feel the need to explain my reasons. After that, I canceled all of our joint credit cards and got new ones in my name only. Then, I headed to the bank and transferred half of the money from our joint checking and savings accounts into a new account in my name. I knew I'd eventually have to deal with the house, but I assumed the courts would let Lisa stay there with the kids. I'd wait to consult with my lawyer before taking any further action on that front. At 3 p.m., I met with the lawyer. He was agreeable enough but warned me that since we were in a no-fault state, Lisa would likely get custody of the kids, and I'd probably lose the house along with half of everything else, even with proof of her infidelity. I told him how I wanted the petition written and made it clear that I intended to make Lisa agree to my terms. He wasn't optimistic but agreed to draft everything as I instructed. He promised the divorce papers would be ready for her to be served by Friday morning. I also had him prepare documents to file against her boss and his company for intentionally ruining my marriage. Those two would be ready by Friday. Everything was falling into place. When I got home that evening, I kept my distance from Lisa. I had reached my limit and just wanted to be done with all of it so I could move on. I knew there would still be plenty of pain ahead, but there was no turning back now. At least I'd be sharing some of that misery with Lisa and her despicable lover. After another quiet, minimal conversation at dinner, I headed to my study. There, I printed out the photos of Lisa and Tom, ready to be used for the posters. I also crafted the signs to accompany them. With that done, I found time to write a letter to Tom Harris's wife, enclosing copies of the incriminating photos and informing her that I had plenty of video evidence, should she decide to divorce him. Just as I was preparing to call it a night, around 11 p.m., I slipped into our bedroom to make sure Lisa was asleep. Then, I quietly went to her car and retrieved the voice-activated recorder I'd placed under her seat. I rewound the tape and listened in on one side of what was clearly a conversation with Tom. Lisa thanked him for their time together that afternoon, saying how much she missed him after they were apart. They discussed spending a full week together, even coming up with a fake story about a real estate convention to cover their tracks. Lisa also mentioned that she had to give me some attention now and then to keep me happy, but her heart was entirely with Tom. They confirmed their plans to meet on Thursday, and the call ended. Strangely, hearing this didn't hurt as much as it had before. Maybe I was finally starting to numb to it. The thought that soon, Lisa would belong solely to Tom filled me with a sense of grim satisfaction. They had no idea how soon their comfortable little world was going to come crashing down. I swapped out the tape for a fresh one and slipped the recorder back under the seat. My hope was that it would catch the moment when Lisa realized everything had F. Harris apart. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't because I was heartbroken. That stage had passed. I was restless with anticipation, knowing what the next day would bring. For the last time, I climbed out of bed while Lisa slept. I stood for a moment, looking at the woman who had once been my entire world, the mother of my children, the woman I thought I'd grow old with. Tears stung my eyes as I realized that this was the last time I'd ever share a bed with her. We'd never embrace again, never talk about our future, because our future no longer existed. I turned away from her, a mix of sadness and anger churning inside me, wondering if she had any idea what she was about to face. Lisa likely had no idea what was about to unfold, but she would soon enough. After showering, I left the house, grabbed breakfast at a local diner, and then briefly stopped by work to let my secretary know I wouldn't be in for the rest of the day. I called Mike to give him an update on the plan. He wished me luck, reminded me to stay cautious, and asked me to keep him in the loop. I made a quick stop at my lawyer's office to confirm everything was in place for Lisa and Tom Harris to be served the next day. Afterward, I called Lisa to arrange picking up the kids from school. My mother had already mentioned wanting to take them for the long weekend, as there was no school on Friday. So I told Lisa I'd swing by the house around 3:45 to grab some of their things and drop them off at Mom's. She sounded excited about the idea, even suggesting in her most seductive tone that we spend Saturday in bed together. I agreed, barely masking my disgust before hanging up. I couldn't tolerate her lies anymore. I didn't rush home. By 12:30, I was parked nearby, waiting for the day's events to unfold. My car was mostly hidden from view, but I had a clear line of sight to anyone pulling into the driveway. I didn't need to watch for long. Lisa and Tom were nothing if not predictable. At exactly 12:50, Lisa's car rolled up the driveway, and 5 minutes later, Tom's followed. The trap was set, and I was ready. It's strange, but I didn't feel the usual pangs of anguish knowing my wife and her boss were upstairs, having their way in our bed while I sat around the corner, waiting for them to finish. She had lost the power to hurt me. I sat there, oddly calm, picturing their routine like it was a cheap, low-budget adult film playing out in my head, lacking any real emotion but with an ending I knew would soon come. At 10 minutes to 3, I watched as Tom backed out of the driveway and drove off. Lisa followed about 10 minutes later, reapplying her lipstick as she pulled away. Perfect. Once they were gone, I pulled into the garage and shut the door behind me. With limited time, I went straight to my office and reviewed the footage from that afternoon. Everything had been captured, right down to the insults about how Tom was a better lover than me. This time, their words didn't sting. I saved the footage to my hard drive and spent the next 10 minutes carrying the signs, complete with their incriminating photos, upstairs. I placed them near the front door for easy access later. Afterward, I packed some clothes and essentials for Shelby and Ryan into the car. The only real regret I had was the pain this would cause my kids. But I reminded myself, it wasn't me who had torn our family apart. That blame lay solely with Lisa. She made the choice to have an affair and wreck our lives. At 3:15, I picked the kids up from school and told them they'd be spending the weekend with Grandma. Naturally, they were thrilled. After all, Grandma was known for spoiling them rotten. 45 minutes later, I dropped them off and returned home, ready to execute the final stage of my plan. And so, here we are back where it all started. The bed, the kitchen table, and the rug displayed on the lawn for the whole neighborhood to see, accompanied by the signs detailing their betrayal. Neighbors watched, and I waited for Lisa's return, knowing she'd soon realize I knew everything. That night, I expected her to call, but she didn't. There was a late call from her phone, but when I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. An hour after Lisa left, the police showed up at my door. They were understanding but insisted I take the signs and photos down, warning me about potential charges for disturbing the peace or public indecency. I complied, but by then, they'd already served their purpose. Lisa had seen them, and from the look on her face before I turned away, I knew her life was already beginning to unravel. That night, I drowned my sorrows in Maker's Mark, slipping into a drunken haze. By Friday morning, I woke up with a raging hangover, but despite the pounding headache, I felt strangely empowered. Though my heart still ached, and I felt a profound loneliness, I found strength in knowing that I had held my anger long enough to take my revenge on Lisa and her lover. By noon, I glanced out the window and saw that the rug, kitchen table, and bed were gone, leaving only the mattress and stained sheets behind. I figured I'd get rid of those later. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but by 3 p.m., chaos erupted. I was sure Tom Harris's wife had received the letter and photographs I sent her that morning, and my lawyer informed me that both Lisa and Tom had been served at work, along with Tom's business partners. The lawyer recounted how Lisa had collapsed in tears when she was served, while Tom reacted with cold indifference, hurling threats at me instead. His business partners wasted no time. They retreated into a closed-door meeting and emerged 15 minutes later, presenting Lisa with her final paycheck and informing Tom that his partnership was terminated. When Tom refused to sell his shares back to them, they invoked the company's morality clause regarding romantic entanglements with employees that gave them the power to sever all ties with both him and Lisa. At the same time, Tom's receptionist reported that his wife was on the phone, demanding to speak with him. She had received the package I sent, and she informed him not to bother coming home, as she intended to file for divorce the next day. By the end of the day, word had spread throughout the office, and after Tom was escorted out of the building, everyone turned their backs on my soon-to-be ex-wife. I was later told she sat on the floor crying for half an hour, inconsolable. Eventually, Lisa pulled herself together enough to leave, though no one knew where she went. The next day, she finally called me, her voice heavy with distress. She asked about the kids and whether they were aware of the situation. I reassured her they were safe with my mother and that I had no intention of burdening them with the ugly details. She seemed relieved and thanked me for that. Then, she asked if she could come by the house to gather some belongings. I agreed and offered to leave for a few hours while she did. She then asked if we could talk, but I flatly refused, which led to more tears on her end. She started pleading, saying she never meant to hurt me, and claimed she was sorry for everything. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at her apology. "How could you say that?" I asked. "You didn't just hurt me. You tore me apart while expressing love and longing for your lover, comparing him to me, telling him he was better." When she tried to deny it, I told her I had recordings of her confessing those very things. The shock in her voice was clear, but I didn't care. Nothing she could say would make a difference now. Lisa insisted she had always loved only me and didn't understand why she said those things to Tom. She claimed it was all to boost his ego because he constantly complained about his wife. I scoffed, pointing out how she had not only praised him but had belittled me, and she'd been sleeping with him for 6 months. Her words, her actions, they were deliberate. She responded by saying she never intended to hurt me and didn't mean any of it. When I pressed her for the truth, she admitted that being with Tom made her feel dirty. And she believed that was how it should be with him, that it was separate from the love she had for me, which she described as pure and clean. I stared in disbelief at the words coming out of her mouth. I told her she was sick, and I cursed myself for not seeing it sooner. She begged for a chance to make things right, insisting again that I was the only one she loved and that she still belonged to me. She cried, pleading for forgiveness, and said she would come to me immediately if I would only let her. But I told her the truth. I no longer loved her, and she was the one who had left me long before I found out about the affair. I made it clear that her actions with Tom had shown me she didn't love me. I was disgusted by her and couldn't wait to have her out of my life for good. She kept pushing, saying she didn't want a divorce and would fight for our marriage. I laughed at the absurdity of it all. "There's nothing left to fight for," I told her. "I'd rather be dead than stay married to you." I accused her of being delusional, completely out of her mind if she thought we could ever go back to the way things were. Desperate, Lisa brought up the divorce petition, telling me that if I agreed to joint custody of the kids, I could keep living in the house and take half of our assets. But then she crossed a line. She threatened to release the videos of her affair if I didn't agree to her terms. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "You would really do that?" I asked. She assured me she would, out of spite, if I didn't comply. Her threats didn't scare me. I told her I didn't care what she did, that her actions had already destroyed everything between us. In the end, she begged me to sign the papers, but I refused. Instead, I told her she should be the one to sign them. After that, I hung up. Eventually, Lisa did sign the divorce papers, and 6 months later it was finalized. Now, Lisa lives with Shelby and Ryan in what was once our home, while I've moved into a nearby condo. We stayed in the same school district to minimize disruption for the kids, though the separation still took a toll on them. Shelby once told me that Lisa had admitted her mistake and accepted that our marriage couldn't survive it. We assured the kids that, no matter what happened between us, we'd always be there for them. As for what Lisa told her family, I can't be sure, but they still talk to me, which makes me think she didn't try to pin the blame entirely on me. My mother, too, saw the divorce as something neither of us could recover from, and she's probably right. Before everything was finalized, I retrieved the voice recorder from Lisa's car one last time, captured a revealing conversation. She had called Tom, thanked him for their time together, and expressed concern about me becoming suspicious. She even suggested they take a break from their affair for a while. When she got home and saw the signs and photos revealing that I knew everything, she called Tom again, this time in a panic, breaking down in tears as she told him that it was all over. I knew it all. It's been over a year since those dark days, and I'm slowly putting the pieces of my life back together. I've kept my distance from dating, and I imagine I'll continue to do so for a while. The thought of going through something like that again makes me wary of starting another serious relationship. Shelby mentioned that Lisa went on a date once, but she came home in tears afterward and hasn't tried again since. She's taken a job as a receptionist at a retirement village and put her real estate career on hold, at least for now. I don't know if she still keeps in touch with Tom Harris, and frankly, I couldn't care less. Tom, on the other hand, divorced his wife, and from what I've heard, he's struggled to find work. Even though I didn't share the videos of their affair with anyone, the word got out, and people were wary of hiring a man known for seducing married women and breaking up families. I blurred Lisa's face in the videos, but I kept all the audio. I heard recently that Tom's ex-wife has moved on and is now dating a kind police officer. Good for her. Tom's former employer, anxious to avoid bad publicity, offered me a generous settlement to keep me from filing a lawsuit. I accepted. That chapter of my life is closed for now, and my focus is entirely on Shelby and Ryan and their future. Maybe one day, I'll be ready to focus on my own future again.